Good morning, welcome to BBC News. I'm Victoria Derbyshire. Here are the headlines this Tuesday morning. Today marks 1 year since the first UK lockdown. Prince Charles asked the nation to come together in a day of reflection.
Let us take a moment together to remember those who have been lost, to give thanks for their lives.
A minute's silence will be held at midday across the country to remember those who've died in the past year and to offer support to the bereaved.
The last year has been probably the hardest year in a generation, and this crisis has touched everybody. And my first thoughts go to those who've lost loved ones.
What has the past year been like for you? Do let me know this morning. You can email Victoria at bbc.co.uk or message me on Instagram or Twitter. It's @VicDerbyshire. £5,000 fines could be issued to anyone heading abroad on holiday under new laws due to come in England next week. A committee has found the Scottish Government's handling of harassment complaints against Alex Salmond was seriously flawed, accusing the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, of misleading their inquiry. A gunman has killed 10 people, including a police officer, in the US state of Colorado after an hours-long standoff at a market. And how you can help stop the dwindling population of hedgehogs in the UK. Hello, good morning. The UK will mark the anniversary of the first national lockdown by pausing today to remember those who've lost their lives to COVID-19. On what's being called a day of reflection, people are being asked to observe a minute's silence at noon. This day comes as a new survey suggests COVID restrictions may have had a lasting impact on the way we all live. The measures continue. From next week, there will be big new fines for travelling abroad without a good reason. And questions are being asked about possible compulsory vaccination for care home workers. Our first report is from our political correspondent Chris Mason, who's been looking back at the year.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. At present, there are just no easy options. The way ahead is hard, and it is still true that many lives will, sadly, be lost.
A year ago today, fewer than 1,000 people in the UK had died with coronavirus. The figure now stands at more than 126,000. Few would have imagined the scale of the loss of lives and liberties, the restrictions we'd still be facing 12 months on. This morning, on what's being called a National Day of Reflection, the Prime Minister says, "The last 12 months have taken a huge toll on us all, and I offer my sincere condolences to those who have lost loved ones. Today, the anniversary of the first lockdown, is an opportunity to reflect on the past year, one of the most difficult in our country's history." He's not the only one who's thinking back over the year just gone.
Over the past year, our country has been through a trial which has tested our resolve and our resilience in countless ways. We've all been inspired by the resourcefulness we have witnessed, humbled by the dedication shown by so many, and moved beyond words by the sacrifices we have seen.
The challenge, of course, is far from over. The scramble for vaccines, the colossal economic damage done, the new wave of cases confronting many of our nearest neighbours, the impact of which will wash upon our shores, as the Prime Minister put it. This morning, more than 50 MPs and peers, along with the health unions, the British Medical Association and the Royal College of Nursing, are suggesting that this day every year should be known as COVID Memorial Day, and a monument should be put up here on Whitehall. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Adam Fleming is at Westminster too. How are ministers going to mark this milestone moment?
Hi, Victoria. Yes, so Boris Johnson has put out a statement overnight talking about how this has been one of the most difficult years in the country's history and kind of paying tribute to all of us, really, saying you don't just have to have been working on the front line in the NHS or developing and delivering the vaccine to have been a hero. Just staying at home was the right thing to do. And so there'll be a minute's silence in the House of Commons later, and then there'll be some events throughout the day. And as Chris was saying there, in Whitehall, government officials are looking at ways to have some kind of more permanent commemoration of what we've all been through.
It's important because those who look after people in care homes have a duty of care towards them. And not every resident in a care home, in an elderly care home, can be vaccinated. Some care homes have asked for us to change the law so that they can require their staff to be vaccinated because of this duty of care. So absolutely, we're looking at that request, but I would just stress that no final decisions have been taken on this.
Yeah, that was actually Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, who's been on the airwaves today talking about this big milestone in the country's battle against coronavirus, but also talking about something that is being considered in the near future by the government, which is this idea of making COVID vaccinations compulsory for everyone who works in a care home. No decisions have been made yet, but the government is considering it. And Matt Hancock sounds like somebody who is very much in favour of it, listing there a whole load of reasons why it would be a good idea if it went ahead. Labour do not think it's necessarily a good idea, and Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Cabinet Office Minister, thinks that maybe you should rely on encouragement rather than compulsion.
I do worry that coercion may do more of the harm than good. If people feel that they're being forced into do something, it starts to raise doubts in their mind about whether it is the right thing to do. So let's improve the information available to people. Let's step up those campaigns to get people vaccinated. But I worry that we might undermine trust and undermine all the good that has been done in terms of rolling out the vaccine if we make it compulsory.
And it sounds like that's a debate that will play out in a consultation that it sounds like the government might be holding with care workers, and it will require a change in the law. And just a reminder, this is about people working in certain sectors of the health and social care world, not the general public.
Got you. Thank you very much, Adam. Anyone caught leaving the UK from England without a reasonable excuse could be fined £5,000 from next week. It's part of new COVID laws which come into force on Monday. The travel ban doesn't apply to the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man or the Republic of Ireland. Valid reasons to travel abroad include visiting a dying relative or attending a funeral. Our correspondent Keith Doyle has been at Heathrow this morning.
Well, here at Heathrow there are far fewer flights, but amongst those leaving this morning are ones to New York, to Chicago, to Paris, to Amsterdam, to Doha. But from next Monday, March the 29th, it will be illegal under English law to leave the UK unless you have a valid reason. To do that, you could end up with a fine of £5,000. There will also be fines of £200 for people who don't fill out those passenger information forms. Now, it's already illegal to go on holiday. However, what this is doing is making an explicit offence to leave the country, so tightening the laws before the normally busy holiday season. Now, this does not apply to the common travel area, so that's the Isle of Man, the Channel Islands and the Republic of Ireland, but they cannot be used as stepping stones, so you can't fly to Dublin and then fly on somewhere else overseas. There are exemptions, so you can leave the country for work, for study, to move house and for various health, family and safety needs. The newspaper headlines this morning, of course, are screaming that holidays abroad are banned until the end of June. Technically, that's right, because this law is in place until the 30th of June, but it will be reviewed by the government body on April the 12th, and then every 35 days after that. So that's the 17th of May and the 21st of June. So they're all the dates already set in stone as part of the government's roadmap. So it could be lifted earlier, but along with the enhanced traffic light system that's also been brought in, the government is putting everything in place so it can put the brakes on that big early summer getaway if it deems that that's necessary.
Let's talk to Paul Charles, CEO of a travel consultancy and co-founder of the Save Our Summer campaign. Hello to you, Mr. Charles. Do you agree with this £5,000 fine?
No, it's a draconian measure which tightens the problems in the travel sector and actually puts off people from even making inquiries, let alone booking. I think it's a smokescreen, to be honest, for the lack of a inbound testing policy in this country. Here we are a year after the first lockdown began, and there's still no airport testing system in place. So it's a major failing of government strategy, I think.
Or it's a really sensible measure to stop people chancing their arm, going on a holiday which you're not allowed to do, and bringing some variant that might be resistant to the vaccine into the UK.
Well, first of all, there are many reasons why people go away, not just for a holiday. They're going to see relatives they haven't seen for a year who may not be dying. So they're not in the exempt category, but they need to see them for mental health reasons. And also, I think it's the case that people are not trying to go away immediately now. They understand we're looking at May onwards. And what the government's done is let the industry just wallow in limbo at the moment until this travel task force reports on April the 12th. We're still some way from that. And so, in effect, the government has put the travel sector into the deep freeze. It's put it on ice. And that is very damaging for 2 million jobs that are at risk now.
Right. And so you're saying if they brought testing in at airports, actually people could travel in and out of the country, and if they were found to be positive, they'd go and isolate?
Yes, and essentially the data is not there yet on the impact of these variants. There's a lot of data coming out suggesting the vaccines do work against the variants in terms of preventing serious illness.
The variants we've seen so far, but as you know, the virus is mutating all the time.
Yeah, and it's going to mutate for years, Victoria. So how long do we have to wait before the borders are open again? Is this a policy that's now going to be in place for a decade?
Well,
or are we going to
sorry, that sounds absurd. Who's suggested it's going to be in place for a decade? No one.
Well, when is the end point?
Well, we'll find out on April the 12th.
Well, if variants keep coming, which is the suggestion, then we have to learn to live with live with coronavirus, and undoubtedly we need an end date to when we're going to get things moving again in the sector. April the 12th is still some time away. Let's hope the task force deliver on outlining not just something that will provide clarity to consumers like a traffic light system, but which also outlines a testing program for when people come into the country. We should be testing on individual risk basis, not on a blanket country basis.
Could the travel industry itself have come up with some infrastructure for testing at its own airports and ports?
Well, it's suggested it and it's put it in place. And in fact, at Heathrow, suppliers have put it in place, but the government hasn't endorsed it. I know in Scotland it's been suggested to the First Minister, but again, it hasn't been endorsed there either. The sector has tried enormously over the last year to put in place the right measures, but the government's not listened effectively to the private sector to put these in place. It's done in other countries, and other countries are trying to make their travel sector more alive and create travel corridors more easily, but we haven't had the right policy in place here.
Thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you. Paul Charles, CEO of the travel consultancy, the PC Agency. I'm asking you this morning how the last 12 months have been for you. What has it been like since lockdown was imposed a year ago today? Catherine says awful in so many ways, but mostly relating to the COVID-19 restrictions and non-relating to COVID-19 itself. Alan says, I'm lucky to live remotely on my little farm in North Yorkshire, so I've enjoyed the extra time with the wildlife, and I feel for all the folk who have lost loved ones. Do tell me what the past 12 months have been like for you, wherever you are in the country, whatever you do, wherever you work. You can send me an email, victoria@bbc.co.uk, or message me on Instagram or Twitter. Official figures released in the last hour show that unemployment stayed generally stable in January, despite the further national lockdowns. The Office for National Statistics says joblessness actually fell a little bit to just below 5% in the 3 months to the end of January, despite the compulsory closure of big parts of the hospitality industry at the beginning of the year. The virus that causes the common cold could help protect the body from COVID-19. Researchers made by scientists at the University of Glasgow suggest that the virus that causes the common cold can effectively boost the COVID virus out of the body's cells. Some viruses are known to compete in order to be the one that causes an infection. The domestic abuse charity Refuge says it's seen a 60% rise in calls to its helpline since the start of the first lockdown. It received more than 131,000 calls between April of last year and February of this year, with nearly a fifth of those from women who said their abuser had threatened to kill them.
Lockdown and the last year has made it even harder to reach out and access support, being unable to leave the house, maybe unable to pick up the phone. And those who were experiencing domestic abuse prior to COVID will have probably had a worse experience, more frequent violence occurring during this very kind of testing time when so many people have been locked indoors with their partners.
Let's bring you the headlines now on BBC News. It's 9:15. Good morning. Today marks 1 year since the first UK coronavirus lockdown. Prince Charles urges the nation to come together in a day of reflection. A minute's silence will be held at midday across the country to remember those who've died in the last year and to offer support to the bereaved. £5,000 fines could be issued to anyone heading abroad on holiday under new laws due to come in England next week. The Scottish Government's handling of harassment complaints against Alex Salmond was seriously flawed, a committee of MSPs has concluded. It said it found it hard to believe that First Minister Nicola Sturgeon wasn't aware of concerns about Mr Salmond's alleged behaviour before November 2017 and that she had misled the inquiry. Yesterday, an independent report cleared her of breaching the ministerial code. Let's talk to our correspondent Nick Eardley, who is at Holyrood. We knew the headline, the top line from this report because it was leaked last week, but fill us in with what you've read this morning, Nick.
Morning, Victoria. The report we got yesterday sort of put to bed the idea that Nicola Sturgeon might be forced to resign this week because her independent advisor found she didn't break the ministerial code. But this report, which has just come out in the last hour or so, is very long, it's very detailed, and it's going to make some pretty uncomfortable reading for Ms Sturgeon and her team because it looks back at what's happened over the last couple of years, from the first allegations being made against Alex Salmond to the Scottish Government to basically where we are now. And there are a few things in particular which are quite critical of the government. So on the harassment policy itself, the government says, the committee says there were big issues. On the fact that the government fought Alex Salmond in court, it says there were fundamental flaws in the government's position. And when you get into some of the detail and you look at what they're saying about Nicola Sturgeon's account, they're not convinced by the evidence she gave them. So as you say, they think that she misled them over evidence she gave about what was discussed in meetings with Alex Salmond at Ms Sturgeon's home. They also think that it's hard to believe that her story that she first found out about any concerns about Mr Salmond in November 2017, that they basically just don't really seem to believe her on that issue. Now, one thing to point out on this is that the committee was, in many of its key conclusions, split on party lines. So the opposition MSPs found that Ms Sturgeon hadn't been completely honest. The SNP MSPs concluded that she was honest. And what I think is going to happen now is you're going to see the SNP say this was a partisan report and you should look at the one from the independent advisor which cleared Nicola Sturgeon instead. You're going to hear opposition parties say that actually there are real concerns about the Scottish Government's actions and those of the First Minister. All of this sets up a pretty fraught election campaign over the next 6 weeks because Holyrood breaks up for the election tomorrow.
But is it your assessment, Nick, that the imminent danger to Nicola Sturgeon and her position has passed or not?
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear from the conversations being had in Holyrood. There will be a confidence vote in Ms Sturgeon this afternoon, but she'll win it because she has the backing of the Green Party, the other pro-independence party in the Scottish Parliament. So Ms Sturgeon is going to stay in her job. She's going to lead the SNP into the election. And the election really matters, not just in Scotland, by the way, because if the SNP win a majority, which polls for a while were suggesting they could potentially do, if they win that majority, they'll say they have a cast iron mandate for another independence referendum. They published a new bill for another independence referendum in Parliament yesterday. Opposition parties want to stop that majority, to say there shouldn't be another independence referendum. So, you know, the stakes are really high over the next 6 weeks, and everything that's happened yesterday with the independent advisor saying Ms Sturgeon didn't break the ministerial code, everything that's happening today with opposition MSPs concluding she misled them, that's going to feed into what's going to be a tense campaign.
Thank you very much, Nick. Let's talk to Conservative MSP Murdo Fraser, who was on the committee into the Scottish Government's handling of harassment complaints. Hello to you, good morning. Help our audience out here. Which holds more weight in your view? The independent report from the QC that was published yesterday, a former prosecutor of Ireland with outstanding credentials, or the committee of MSPs which have split down party lines to decide Nicola Sturgeon misled them in her evidence?
Well, both are significant, and both of us had to look at the evidence that was in front of us. And if you read James Hamilton's report, it's very interesting what he says about Nicola Sturgeon's version of events. Let me quote to you what he says in paragraph 7.10 about her explanation as to why she could not recall a significant meeting with one of Alex Salmond's team. He says this will inevitably lead to be greeted with suspicion or scepticism by some, but is not impossible. That's hardly a ringing endorsement of the story she put forward.
Well, can I give you another quote from James Hamilton's report? I'm not aware of anything, he said, in the conduct of the First Minister which could be considered to be a breach of the code.
He also went on to say, of course, it is for the Scottish Parliament to decide whether they were misled by the First Minister. He does not draw a conclusion on that particular point, and that precisely is what this committee of the Scottish Parliament has done. It has looked at the evidence, it has examined the competing accounts of the various events that took place, and it has come to the conclusion that Nicola Sturgeon did mislead the committee and did mislead the Scottish Parliament. But of course, this is in the context of a much wider report about catastrophic failings within the Scottish Government that failed two women who came forward with complaints against the former First Minister, Alex Salmond. A court process that was atrociously badly handled by the Scottish Government that ended up costing the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds in legal costs. The committee unanimously concludes that there are very, very serious and significant failings in the way this matter was dealt with by the Scottish Government, and no one has taken responsibility, no one has lost their job, and no one has resigned. And Nicola Sturgeon, as First Minister of Scotland, is ultimately responsible for the catastrophic mishandling of this whole process.
Are you going ahead then with that vote of no confidence in the First Minister later?
Yes, we are, and we're doing that on the basis that she is ultimately responsible for the failings in this process, and also we believe, as does this committee report, that she misled Parliament.
Even though, with the support of the Green Party, you are unlikely to win that vote, because the Green Party will support the SNP.
Well, we accept that the Green Party are throwing their lot in with the SNP. I understand they're looking for some sort of coalition deal post the election, should the results work out that way. So they're prepared to sell their souls in order to potentially get some seats round the cabinet table. They'll have to examine their own consciences in that respect. We want to stand up for the work of a parliamentary committee that has thoroughly investigated this matter, has come to conclusions about catastrophic failures within the Scottish Government, and has also come to the conclusion that Nicola Sturgeon misled the Scottish Parliament. So we think the right thing for her to do now is to step down. That would be the honourable thing in view of all the failings that have been exposed.
Your leader, Douglas Ross, was calling for Nicola Sturgeon's resignation and a vote of no confidence before she'd even given evidence to your committee, which suggests to some of your critics that this is some kind of personal vendetta against her rather than a genuine attempt to look at what reforms might be needed or to get to the truth.
Well, firstly, if you look at the committee report today, there are very, very extensive recommendations about the reforms that are needed. We come to the conclusion, for example, that a parliamentary committee, limited in its powers, really struggle to get to the truth of this matter because of a lack of cooperation from the Scottish Government, and it may well be a judge-led inquiry is the appropriate way to try and get the information that the Scottish Government refused to give us, despite us trying very hard to get to the truth of the matter.
My point was that your leader, Douglas Ross, was calling for her resignation before any of this work had been done by your committee.
No, that's not the case. Let's remember, Nicola Sturgeon gave her written evidence to the committee back, I think, in July last year, and it was perfectly competent to assess the evidence Nicola Sturgeon had given in writing against the written evidence given by the former First Minister, Alex Salmond, and by members of his team who corroborated the evidence that he had presented to the committee. So it's perfectly fair to assess those two sets of evidence against one another, even before the oral evidence was given by the First Minister. And let's remember, what we have here are two tribes within the Scottish National Party. The former First Minister of Scotland, the former leader of the SNP, accusing the current First Minister and current leader of the SNP of pursuing a vendetta against him.
Which, of course, Nicola Sturgeon has denied.
Seemed deprived of his liberty. Now, these are extraordinary claims, and people in Scotland will be looking at this, asking themselves, how can we trust these people to be in government when they are fighting like ferrets in a sack?
Thank you very much. Murdo Fraser.
Thank you.
Homes, roads and livestock have been washed away or cut off in Australia as the country continues to face its worst flooding in decades. Parts of New South Wales have seen almost 1 metre of rain, and there's more to come, with levels expected to peak today. Thousands of people have been evacuated and troops deployed as the government warned the floods could deluge parts of Sydney. A gunman has killed 10 people in a supermarket in the US state of Colorado. The victims include a police officer who attended the shooting in the city of Boulder. David Willis reports.
Early afternoon in a residential area of Boulder, Colorado, police are called to a local grocery store where a man with a rifle had opened fire. As people were led to safety, chilling video emerged of victims lying wounded both inside and outside the store. Among the dead was local police officer Eric Talley, an 11-year veteran of the Boulder Police Force.
Officer Talley responded to the scene, was the first on the scene, and he was fatally shot. I also want to commend the heroic actions of the officers responding not only from Boulder PD, but from across the county and other parts of this region. Police officers' actions fell nothing short of being heroic.
Pictures from the scene showed a middle-aged man, shirtless and dressed in shorts, being led away from the grocery store in handcuffs. Officials won't confirm he was the gunman, nor will they comment on a possible motive.
So they're pulling onto Broadway here.
As SWAT team officers converged on the scene, the White House said President Biden had been briefed on the incident. Last month, on the 3rd anniversary of a mass shooting in Florida in which 17 people died, he called for background checks on anyone seeking to buy a gun and a ban on assault weapons. But this is the second mass shooting in this country in the space of a week, and it has already prompted calls for a new national conversation about gun violence. But the right to own a gun is enshrined in the Constitution here, and those seeking a change in the law have had their attempts thwarted many times before. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Thank you for your messages today. I've been asking what the last 12 months have been like for you, because obviously today marks exactly a year since the first lockdown was imposed. Good morning, says Val. The last year has been especially hard on unpaid family carers who are caring for someone with dementia. None of the usual day centres or in-person carer support group meetings have been available. The lunch clubs, the coffee mornings, the singing activities that were our lifeline are all suspended. Every day is Groundhog Day for carers who have someone with dementia depending on us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this really sad email from Gail. We lost our lovely son to COVID. He was 36, a dialysis patient who couldn't fully shield due to his life-saving treatment at hospital 3 times a week. If you want to let me know what the past year has been like for you, just send me an email, victoria@bbc.co.uk, or you can message me on Instagram or Twitter. Here's a look back at some of the key moments of the past 12 months.
The authorities in China say there has been more than 130 new cases of a mysterious respiratory virus in 2 days. The infection was first identified in Wuhan, but it's now been confirmed it spread to other cities.
The World Health Organization declares a global health emergency as China's coronavirus spreads. At least 170.
The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and this country is not alone. All over the world, we're seeing the devastating impact of this invisible killer.
I've developed mild symptoms of the coronavirus, that's to say, a temperature and a persistent cough.
The latest tonight from BBC News is that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is in intensive care at St Thomas's Hospital in London, suffering from the effects of coronavirus.
A 99-year-old war veteran has decided to walk 100 lengths of his back garden. He wants to raise money for the NHS.
The reason I'm doing it is because of the service that I have personally got from the National Service.
I'm sorry to have to tell you that today the number of deaths recorded from COVID in the UK has surpassed 100,000.
A historic day in the global fight against coronavirus. 90-year-old Margaret Keenan is the first person in the world to receive the Pfizer vaccine outside trials.
We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Coming up to 9:30, let's bring you a look at the weather forecast for right across the UK. Here's Sarah.
Hello. It is a cloudier day out there today than we've seen recently, and the breeze is picking up too, with a few splashes of rain today in the north and the west. Driest conditions further east. Bit of sunshine coming through for southeast England, East Anglia and perhaps eastern Scotland as well, but the breeze will be noticeable with gusts widely about 20 to 30 miles per hour, but across Scotland and Northern Ireland we could see 40 to even 55 mile per hour gusts of wind in the far northwest. More persistent rain later on in the northwest too, and temperatures between about 9 to 13 degrees today. Into the evening hours and overnight, then cloud and rain clears out of Scotland and Northern Ireland. That sits across England and Wales, so stopping temperatures falling too low here overnight. But under those clearer skies further north, could it just be a touch of frost for the sheltered glens of Scotland first thing Wednesday. Through the day tomorrow, early cloud and rain will linger across parts of southern and eastern England through the day. Sunny spells elsewhere, but further heavy showers into the northwest later in the day. And temperatures reasonably mild still, around about 8 to 13 degrees. Bye-bye.
Around the world, governments have gone with different strategies to combat COVID.
They knew that masks are so important. They went for herd immunity.
I think this is kind of a roller coaster for all of us.
With very different outcomes.
Well, it was a catastrophe, I would say.
It became obvious that the infection was everywhere.
A year-long investigation.
Somebody needs to be held accountable. Clear all those questions.
Panorama, COVID, who got it right? Streaming now on BBC iPlayer.
Hello, this is BBC News on Victoria Derbyshire. Here are the headlines. Today marks 1 year since the first UK lockdown. Prince Charles asked the nation to come together in a day of reflection.
Let us take a moment together to remember those who have been lost, to give thanks for their lives.
A minute's silence will be held at midday across the UK today to remember those who've died in the past year and to offer support to the bereaved.
The last year has been probably the hardest year in a generation, and this crisis has touched everybody. And my first thoughts go to those who've lost loved ones.
£5,000 fines could be issued to anyone heading abroad on holiday under new laws due to come in England next week. A gunman has killed 10 people, including a police officer, in the US state of Colorado after an hours-long standoff at a grocery market. A committee has found the Scottish Government's handling of harassment complaints against Alex Salmond was seriously flawed, accusing First Minister Nicola Sturgeon of misleading their inquiry. And how you can help the dwindling hedgehog population in the UK. Time for sport now, and here's John in Salford.
Hi Victoria, nice to see you. Good morning. It's been a frustrating start for England in the first match of their latest series with India. This one's in the 50-over form of the game and comes after defeats in the Test and T20 series. England, though, are world champions in this format, having won that famous World Cup final back in 2019. There's not quite been the same level of drama as that match at the start of India's innings. They moved steadily through their first 15 overs, but in the last few minutes, that man there has made the breakthrough. Who else? Ben Stokes taking that key wicket. India now 78 for 1, but England with plenty to do if they're to make a winning start in this series. The former Huddersfield, Leicester and Bolton striker Frank Worthington has died at the age of 72. His career started at Huddersfield in the 60s and spanned over 20 clubs, including spells in America. He was capped 8 times for England, a true entertainer and maverick. Gary Lineker calling him his boyhood hero when he was at Leicester. Worthington had been suffering with dementia for several years, his family confirming the news that he died peacefully in hospital yesterday. Frank Worthington, who's died at the age of 72. It will be an emotional weekend for the Schumacher family. 7 years since Formula One legend Michael Schumacher had a skiing accident that left him with a devastating brain injury. He's not been seen in public since, but this weekend, his 22-year-old son Mick makes his Formula One debut after a stellar rise through the ranks. He'll be driving for the Haas team when the new season begins in Bahrain, and no doubt his dad and his legacy will be spurring him on.
I'm happy to have brought back the Schumacher name into Formula One. Obviously I've done it with championships on my back, so we've proven that I'm able to drive a race car. It's obviously great, and I don't feel a blink of pressure of it. As I said, it's a motivation for me. I'm proud of it, and I'm happy to be here. It's going to be an amazing weekend in Spa. It's going to be an emotional weekend. As I said, it's 30 years since my dad has driven his first race, and we've been exactly the same age, so it's even funnier and even more emotional, and it's great to have also seen how he progressed through the ranks and then made his way into Formula One, and now seeing how I made my way into Formula One it's amazing.
Yeah, and it will be emotional, won't it, with Mick not having his dad there with him. Ronnie O'Sullivan may fall in and out of love with snooker, but he now has 1,100 century breaks to his name. It was a real battle between two legends of the game at the Tour Championship at Celtic Manor, and O'Sullivan just edged John Higgins, winning by 10 frames to 8 to reach the semi-finals. And the 4-time Tour de France winner, Chris Froome, is still short on racing fitness as he continues on the comeback trail with his new team, Israel Startup Nation. He's more than 8 minutes behind the leaders going into the second stage of the Volta a Catalunya. Fellow Britons Geraint Thomas and Adam Yates finished safely in the main bunch on day 1, just behind Andreas Kron. And that, Victoria, is all from the BBC Sports Centre for now. It's back to you.
Thank you. Let's get more now on the news that the government is considering compulsory vaccinations for care home workers. The Health Secretary says the idea is in response to requests from the care sector. The Chief Executive Chair of the National Care Association, Nadra Ahmed, gave this reaction.
It's an interesting step forward by the government because this is something that is a challenging issue, but we've got to be very mindful of the fact that we've got to maintain the rights of our workforce to make sure that they are absolutely happy and persuaded that the vaccine is for their own benefit and it is for their good as well as the work that they do. And additionally, I think we've just got to think through how this will work. I think I can absolutely understand that families, and we are getting people talking to us about, families wanting to know whether the vaccine has, we're fully vaccinated in our services. We're getting people asking us about this when they come to look at a care home. So the pressure is there. But we must also maintain that this has got to be something that is about persuasion rather than compulsion. And if we're going to go down the compulsion route, how is that going to work?
Thank you for your messages regarding the past 12 months. Lockdown a year on, says Lauren, on Instagram. I'm a university student with multiple part-time jobs in the hospitality sector and also a carer for my 95-year-old great-grandfather. This past year has been both good and awful, no in between. With my hospitality jobs being ended, I've really struggled with paying the bills. There's also been a family rift. My 95-year-old great-grandfather is in the last years of his life and we haven't been able to take him out for his usual trips to cafes during the pandemic. Thank you for that, Lauren. If you want to let me know how it's been for you, please do. It's obviously a year today, that's why I'm asking that question, since lockdown came in. On the 23rd of March 2020, Boris Johnson outlined measures to stop the spread of COVID-19. Since then, the official number of people who've died with COVID-19 has risen from 364 to 126,172. This morning, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, reflected on the last 12 months.
The last year has been probably the hardest year in a generation, and this crisis has touched everybody. And my first thoughts go to those who've lost loved ones, and the impact of that is permanent. I know that from my family, and obviously it's vital that we are constantly learning and constantly looking at the evidence, listen to scientific advisors, listen to all of the advice, and look at what has happened and how we can improve the response throughout that. Thankfully, at this point, there is now hope. We've seen in the last just this morning information published saying that dexamethasone has saved 22,000 lives. That's the treatment that was discovered in the NHS. And of course, we have the vaccine programme. And because of the success of the vaccine programme, we have our route out of this.
The Labour Shadow Minister for the Cabinet Office, Rachel Reeves, also reflected on the last 12 months. She said a huge number of mistakes have been made by the government in the handling of the whole pandemic.
Well, today is a day of remembrance and reflection after the year that we've been through together as a country. And I think today all of our thoughts are with those who have lost loved ones, but also those who have made huge sacrifices, putting themselves in harm's way to protect all of us. Because while this virus has affected us all, it hasn't affected us all equally. And so that's where my thoughts and reflections are today. But in terms of what Labour would do differently, I think that a huge number of mistakes have been made over the last year. Was one practical thing that could be done now, and that is to change the way that test and trace runs. At the moment, contact tracing is contracted out to a whole range of private sector companies, including Serco and Cittel and others. Labour would bring that back in-house, run by the NHS and by our local authorities who are closer to the communities in which they work. I think that would help ensure that we are tracing more people. It would also ensure that people get the support that they need to self-isolate, because it's all well and good at tracking and tracing people, but we need to ensure that people can make those decisions to stay at home and quarantine when they need to.
Being in lockdown has given people time to reflect, time to look at their lives potentially. The charity Action on Addiction says it saw an 86% rise in the number of people seeking help at the beginning of this year compared with last. Let's talk now to Pius Petunias, who has lived a lot of his life with drug addiction. In lockdown, he reached a crisis point and he realised it was time to get help. Pius, hello. Thank you for talking to us. How are you?
Hi, good morning. I'm glad to be here. I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this. And
good.
It's been a really difficult year for me and loads of other people. And I found the disruption in patterns that lockdown has provided has also disrupted negative patterns, and people have found different ways to live their lives. And yeah. I'm one of those people, yeah.
Well, I know it was last July that your mental health reached a crisis point. Can you tell our audience what impact having the drug addiction was having on you?
It had a massive impact. It was, for me, it was a do or die issue, to be quite honest. And leading up to July, when it was very, very difficult for me, my mental health was becoming poorer and poorer as time went on. And it was a turning point around July time where I really asked myself a lot, and for a long time, how can I help myself? What options I have? What I actually want from life? What life is? And problems don't seem that big when there's a global crisis going on. You see different government responses to the pandemic, and just a lot of existential questions. And it eventually led me to ask what I actually want.
Yeah.
And I did decide that I want to choose I chose to postpone my studies. I put my studies on hold for a year. I've now returned to my studies, studying social psychology at Leeds Beckett. I finally reached out for help with a private psychotherapist that I've been seeing since around September, which is absolutely great for me. It's something I've always needed. I'm on antidepressants now, which also help. And I've also reached out to a local addiction support service, Forward Leeds, that I'm eternally grateful for. I'd say I'm a unique service user in some way because I only really go to the mutual aid meetings every week. And since coming in contact with them, that's what I've been doing. Once a week, I go onto an online Zoom meeting to check in and hear everybody else's struggles and wins and all sorts of difficulties and life issues people are experiencing in addiction.
How many months now then have you been clean in total?
I don't really like counting, but since around July time. Yeah.
Right, okay, fair enough. And I wonder, when did your relationship with drugs begin? What kind of things were you taking?
It's really hard to say because alcohol comes into the picture when people are really young, probably around 12 years old or 13 years old, start experimenting with alcohol. Eventually, I started smoking cannabis at around 14, 15, and I was generally interested in drugs. So I experimented with quite a few different classes, but the most difficult ones that really impacted me a lot in terms of addiction have been opiates and cocaine.
And you were addicted to both those, were you?
Yeah. After coming out of hospital in 2019, I stopped taking opiates. And that was a very difficult time. I've not had an easy couple of years. And yeah, I got off opiates around that time. And cocaine was the real issue sort of last year over the winter. It was something that I would wake up and go to sleep with, and that it becomes the priority in life.
Do you think you would have got clean if it hadn't been for lockdown?
I think I would have in due time. Yeah.
In due time, though?
Yeah, exactly. And due time for some people means, you know, hitting the most extremes of rock bottom. So in a sense, yes, lockdown has been that time for reflection for me.
Do you have any concerns about coming out of this lockdown and how it might affect the routine of your life, or are you okay?
I'd say I'm pretty confident. Good. Not that I'm letting my guard down, but I have the tools and resources for me to go ahead, and I'm taking sobriety seriously. And you know, people say when people look at a person in addiction or a person in recovery, rather, like myself, people are going to put a lot of credit on me as doing a really great job at getting sober, but ignoring the resources that took me there and the organizations that have helped me. And equally, people in drug addiction, in active or destructive addiction, people really put the blame on the individual rather than the lack of help and support that they receive. So I think the support that I have received now is what really is getting me to become stronger in my sober life.
Yeah. Well, good luck, Pius, and thank you so much for talking to us this morning. I know with addiction you manage it every day, don't you? Every day it's something that you have to consider and control. So I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Pius. Thank you. If you want to contact our action line, because of the kind of things that we've just been talking about, Pius and myself, then there are loads of organisations that can help you. There it is, BBC Action Line, bbc.co.uk/action line, or you can call 0800 066 066. Now, the number of weekly deaths in England and Wales has fallen below the 5-year average for the first time since last August. A total of 1,500 deaths registered in England and Wales in the week ending March the 12th mention COVID-19 on the death certificate. That's according to ONS figures out in the last 15 minutes or so. Robert Cuff is our head of statistics. Now, that is the lowest number since when?
Well, you have to skip a bank holiday,
okay,
but it's the lowest since pretty much August, and it's across the whole UK.
Right.
So the whole picture has been, that massive spike in deaths we saw, thousands of deaths, thousands of excess deaths throughout April and May last year. There were a couple of weeks, kind of June, July, where we were seeing deaths running slightly below their normal level, but ever since then, with the exception of the August bank holiday that messes around death registrations, we've been seeing deaths running steadily above average levels. So the news this week that we've seen them below 5% below is a big thing. It's another bit of good news and an indication of the right direction of travel that we're all moving in. And as I said, we're seeing it in England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and in most kind of settings in the UK as well.
And this comes after yesterday's daily death toll, which suggested it was 17, which is the lowest we've seen for a long time.
Yeah, so they're all moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'm always a little bit nervous about getting excited about the Monday number, specifically on the daily death count.
Sure.
We will see probably a jump this afternoon at 4 o'clock when the number comes out, but I wouldn't want it to alarm people because these death registrations that take a little bit longer to come out, that are more comprehensive, they're going in the right direction. If you look at the average of those daily figures, they're going in the right direction. It's all moving in a good way. It's not over yet, but all going positive.
What is normal? What does normal mean then in a normal year?
Well, normally we would use the last 5 years to tell us what to expect this week. But in a normal year, you wouldn't have just had a pandemic that had killed more than 100,000 people. And so that's why we'd be a little bit nervous about using today's news to say that the numbers of deaths are back to normal. They're just below the average we saw in the 5 years, 2015 to 2019. If it really was over, we would really be expecting to see deaths a lot below that. We're still seeing about 1,600 COVID deaths a week. That's also moving down, but it's certainly not zero.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you. Right, the hedgehog population in the UK is dwindling, but we can all help, apparently. Tim Moffat has this.
Gordon's alive, thanks to some expert help.
This is Gordon, and Gordon was brought to us a few days ago. Sadly, he had some plastic stuck around his neck.
Tiggywinkle's Animal Hospital in Buckinghamshire treats more than 2,000 sick and injured hedgehogs each year.
He had some wounds under his armpits. We often see infection and nasty wounds, but we'll also see them with leg injuries. They may have got hit by cars and have broken limbs, and we'll fix those fractures if possible.
And as the weather improves and we start gardening again, there's a plea to think about hedgehogs. Numbers have been declining for years. The ones here are named after those who rescued them.
Here we have Dave. And Dave came to us a couple of weeks ago with a really large wound from a strimmer injury, we think. So with the strimmers and lawnmowers, just be really careful before you tackle your overgrown garden. And just make sure you haven't got a hedgehog that's still hibernating or a hedgehog that's just sleeping there.
Hedgehogs face challenges on many fronts. Some are difficult for individuals to influence, such as changes to the way agricultural land is farmed. But if you have a garden, there are things you can do to help.
This garden in Surrey is very hedgehog friendly. Its owner is one of the UK's 70,000 hedgehog champions.
We've included hedgehog highways. We've got one into next door that way, one through to that way, and they're just holes in the fences because they do travel a lot at night. We've got hedgehog houses. We leave out meaty cat and puppy food. Definitely not milk or bread. Yeah, they're lactose intolerant.
Thanks to some remote cameras, Samantha's able to watch the hedgehogs each night.
We tend to watch a lot more of the video footage during the evening live rather than the TV.
Being able to interact with hedgehogs and nature in this way, what impact has that had on you?
I think it's given me a purpose. I'm housebound, I've got ME. It enables me to really relax. It's just really fun to watch and see what goes on. They do swim and they do seem to quite like water, but it must make it safe so that they can get out. We put in a slab of wood which we covered with chicken wire, so that gave grip so that they could climb out easily.
Hedgehog Street is a campaign that was launched 10 years ago to try and boost numbers.
So we know that hedgehogs have declined by 50% in rural areas and 30% in urban areas since the millennium. So in rural areas it's things like intensive agriculture, the use of pesticides, it's limiting the amount of shelter and food for them. In urban areas there's more and more buildings, walls, barriers, roads, things like that.
Simple changes, though, seem to be working.
There's a glimmer of hope in urban and suburban areas. We know that the decline in these areas is actually starting to slow down a little bit. You know, that's thanks to people making all these changes in their gardens, you know, all these small, simple changes that are going to make a really big difference for hedgehogs.
Prickly and shy, but much loved and much missed. Hedgehogs, it seems, need gardeners' help. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
This email from Jane Sanjeevi, who says, I'm from India. I work as a nurse in the NHS. My husband and I haven't seen our parents or families for 3 years now. And there are so many other international colleagues who are going through the same. The past year has been hard. I've had a baby and being in lockdown has been emotionally draining for both the baby and me with limited social contact. Thank you for that. If you want to email, it's victoria@bbc.co.uk or you can message me on Instagram or Twitter. Time for all the weather now. Here's the forecast from Sarah.
Hello. We're seeing a gradual change in weather type over the next few days, things turning a little more unsettled. Today, certainly a cloudier day than we've seen recently. The breeze picking up through the day as well, and there'll be some rain, particularly across northern and western parts of the UK. Further east, you're closer to an area of high pressure across the near continent, keeping things largely dry. But we've got the breeze generally coming up from a southwesterly direction, so that's drawing in a fair amount of cloud coming in off the Atlantic. Best of any blue skies probably for parts of eastern Scotland, eastern England as well. But even here, that cloud will increase during the afternoon. Some splashes of rain, particularly around coasts and hills in the north and the west, before more persistent rain arrives in the northwest later on. But gusts of wind quite widely, about 20 to 30 miles per hour, perhaps as much as 60 miles per hour across the Western Isles. Temperatures today, somewhere between about 9 to perhaps 13 degrees or so, so staying warmest and driest towards East Anglia and the southeast. Into the evening hours then, and the cloud and rain will sit across parts of England and Wales, with clearer skies for Scotland and for Northern Ireland. Still some showers rattling through on the breeze here, but quite a chilly night in the north, so temperatures down to around 2 or 3 degrees. Could be just a touch of frost in the most prone spots, whereas further south under that cloud, it won't be as cold as it was last night. Into Wednesday then, we've got this weather front which is just going to start to wave a little bit, so that could hang back some cloud and some patchy rain, particularly for southern and eastern parts of England, I think, through the course of the day. Elsewhere, quite a bit of sunshine, brighter day compared to what we've got out there today, but still some further heavy showers pushing into the northwest later in the day, and quite breezy conditions here. So temperatures Stornoway, for instance, just 8 degrees or so, but down towards London, 13 the high on Wednesday. A similar picture into Thursday. We've still got that southwesterly breeze, bringing some sunshine towards eastern parts of the UK. Further showers rattling through towards the north and the west, but reasonably mild. Temperatures about 9 to perhaps 14 degrees on Thursday. But then it's going to be all changed towards the end of the working week. Into Friday, we've got quite an active cold front that moves its way eastwards. That will open the doors to this cold flow of air coming in from the northwest. So a return to the blue colours for Friday. Some sunny spells, but also some blustery showers moving in, and they could fall as sleet and snow over the higher ground in the north and the west too. So fairly chilly day, just 7 to 11 degrees, but milder by the weekend. Bye-bye.